Welcome, gentlemen. Sir, before we start the conversation, infrastructure finance, especially in India, is a 90s story, when we all started with the private investments into the infrastructure space. And within 20 years, we saw that most of the companies which got into infrastructure, they started burning their hands. In power sector, there was a saying that from coal mining to discoms, everybody was in a mess. Everybody was on the verge of bankruptcy. So was the road sector. Civil aviation was not taking off as we all wanted. But suddenly we saw a change in the regime and there was a change in the perspective. And they started de-risking projects, they started bringing in new models, but still, the life of infrastructure players is not that healthy. And that makes banks also vary, because banks also live through a very crisis-oriented zone, where we started calling it as a twin balance sheet problem. And where, the investment which they were making, that was also not returning back, and that was also hurting the banks. So we saw IBC and other type of innovations. But now, sir, situation is a bit more complicated after COVID and slowdown in the economy. So I want to understand from you, gentlemen, that where are we now? We have lived through the most difficult times. Is that time over? Are we ready for a newer infrastructure jump? Every year we are seeing, more and more infrastructure projects, pipelines which are being announced, but very few are taking off. So, Mr. Doll, if I can start with you, IPP is a very, very complicated subject now. Even the conventional power producers, they are not selling to their full capacity. So is IPP dead?
I think, am I there? Okay, yeah. I think you asked a question which has about 100 answers. And after lunch, to expect the audience to be able to absorb 100 is not possible. So I'm going to basically go back a little before I come to IPPs to say कि आपने एक सड़क बनाई, you made a road, you are a Roman emperor, आपने ट्रेजरी से पैसे निकाल के स्लेव्स को यूज करके वो रोड बना दी और लोग यूज कर रहे हैं. अब आप आ जाइए राजा महाराजाओं के ज़माने में, in the 19th and 20th century, you built colleges, schools, canals, public information, infrastructure. Again, you use the money of the taxpayer. Now, we tried as a country to do a major experiment when the economy was opened up in 1991. And the experiment may, one American company came forward and said, I will invest $5 billion in the Indian economy, in a power plant. अब उन्होंने कहा जी आप मुझे ये बताइए कि we are going to do off balance sheet financing. Now for my audience who perhaps don't know what off balance sheet financing is, it's basically not financing against how much money you put in, but against the future revenue that will come. So quick 3 examples. Pilot retires from an airline, takes a jumbo jet on lease, says I will transport flowers from Holland to America. Against that contract, the bank finances the aircraft. Example 2, one of our Indians decided to do oil tanking business. So he got a contract from Saudi Arabia to transport the oil, goes to the shipyard. He says, this is the estimate for making a ship. He goes to the bank, says, sir, will you finance the ship? I am the captain. I know how to run. I'm a Navy chap. Meri finance kar dijiye for future revenue. So off balance sheet financing ka matlab ye hai ki it is not your balance sheet, but it is the future revenue which will come. Now very quickly, before I come to this $5 billion project of 92-93, the Noida toll bridge has been sitting outside Delhi for a long, long time. It was losing money. Again, it was off balance sheet financing. And then we had to Gurgaon, a beautiful road made by a private developer. Now both these situations, you can see today, it's not in the management of the company which had put in the money or had done the contract, okay, for off-balance sheet financing. Now coming back to this $5 billion company, उन्होंने कहा जी आप जो अपनी बैलेंस शीट दीजिए कि how much are you net worth? So in that case, they found out that like Vayudut, if some of you remember, they did not have an audited balance sheet for 20 years. किसी auditor ने balance sheet ही नहीं दी थी. So the attitude was, we are government, don't ask us stupid questions. तुमको invest करना है करो, and that's it. Don't laugh, it's true. So they said, okay, tell us your balance sheet. He said, you don't have a balance sheet. We are an electricity board. Balance sheet का सवाल ही नहीं है. जो हम बोलते हैं वो government दे देती है. So then they said, how do we finance this? How do you finance a project when you don't know कि आगे revenue कितना आएगा, आपके पास पैसे कितने हैं, आपकी network नहीं है, how do you finance it? Future revenue flow. करते 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 the project was with great difficulty financed. Remember 91 India was bankrupt and we are talking 92, 93, 94. And those days in the world's opinion, India was not an investment destination. Now it has changed, but I'll come to that. The second part I want to mention here is that when this project had to be financed, we had to get the state government guarantee. तो स्टेट गवर्नमेंट को पूछा कि भाई आपका रेवेन्यू क्या है, उसने बोला सर ऑक्ट्रॉय से इतना मिलता है और मुझे रजिस्ट्रेशन चार्जेस से इतना मिलता है, सेल्स टैक्स कलेक्शन इतना है. दैट टाइम देयर वाज नो जीएसटी. बट दैट्स नॉट इनफ. 3 महीने के अंदर वो भी खत्म हो जाएगा. हाउ विल यू पे अस? मैं आपको माल बेच रहा हूं, आप मुझे पे कैसे करेंगे ये तो बताइए. फ्यूचर रेवेन्यू फ्लो की बात हो रही है. तो उन्होंने बोला देखो हम वी विल नॉट इंक्रीज द टैरिफ. आप टैरिफ इंक्रीज नहीं करोगे तो आपको यू विल नॉट बी एबल टू पे मी बैक. ये चलता रहा. फाइनली गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया ने एक उनको काउंटर गारंटी दी कि जो आपका डेट है हम उसकी गारंटी देते हैं. प्रोजेक्ट लगा, बहुत कंट्रोवर्सी हुई, ऐसा प्रोजेक्ट कभी लगा नहीं था. एंड ऑफ इट वो प्रोजेक्ट क्रैश कर गया पॉलिटिकल रीजन से, नथिंग एल्स. जब वो क्रैश कर गया, व्हाट वी फाइंड वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग इज व्हेन वी वेंट आउट आफ्टर 1998 almost 2000, what is the international investor thinking? He says this country is not honoring guarantees. And if the government is not honoring guarantees, then how will people invest in future revenue flow projects? And that's the big question mark, right? Now what has happened is, and by the way, उन्होंने एक चीज और बोली थी कि this is the only country which does not honor its constitutional guarantee, which is a matter of privy purses. Channappa Reddy, I'm sure he's going to expand on it if he wants to. But at the end, the project crashed, went into arbitration, and ultimately government of India had to pay money. It's a very long story, but मैं little cut करके बता रहा हूँ. Now coming to IPPs. IPPs के साथ क्या हुआ? We started IPPI in 1993-94. I was a part of the cabinet secretary's mission to go to America to attract investments. प्राइवेट सेक्टर वालों ने कहा उधर कि देखो भाई वी आर वेरी कंफर्टेबल विद प्राइवेट सेक्टर टू प्राइवेट सेक्टर. वी डोंट वांट टू डील विद योर गवर्नमेंट और अमेरिकन गवर्नमेंट. ठीक है. सो एनी दैट वेंट ऑन द प्रोसेस. आईपीपीज का फाइनली इलेक्ट्रिसिटी एक्ट 2001 की जगह 2003 में पास हुआ. उसमें क्या था, उसके पहले एनटीपीसी और पावर ग्रिड को गारंटी मिलती है गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया एंड रिजर्व बैंक से कि आपका कोई भी बिल ड्यू है इट विल बी पेड फ्रॉम ए ट्राइपार्टाइट एग्रीमेंट. तो एनटीपीसी जो है वो कॉस्ट प्लस पे प्रोजेक्ट लगाता गया. गवर्नमेंट ने सोचा अब कंपेटिटिव बिडिंग लानी चाहिए, तो 2010 में एनटीपीसी को कहा कि आप भी कंपेटिटिवली बिड करें. उन्होंने कहा सर हमें एग्जेम्पशन दे दो, वी डोंट वांट कंपेटिटिव बिडिंग. आईपीपीसी को बोला यू ओनली हैव टू डू कंपेटिटिव बिडिंग. 2011 में एनटीपीसी साइंड इन जनवरी इफ आई रिमेंबर करेक्टली 50,000 मेगावाट्स के एमओयू साइन कर दिए पूरे इंडिया में. अब जब प्राइवेट सेक्टर आया कंपेटिटिव बिड करके उनसे सस्ते में, उसको बोला हमें पावर नहीं चाहिए, वी डोंट नीड पावर. एंड सेकेंडली इफ यू सेट अप द पावर स्टेशन, आपको पेमेंट की कोई गारंटी नहीं है, आपको पीपीए नहीं है, गारंटी नहीं, और आपको मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट कोयला नहीं मिलेगा. सो इट इज अ अनइवन फील्ड एंड देयरफॉर आईपीपीज के साथ रॉ डील हुआ. इट इज अ वेरी रॉ डील फॉर आईपीपीज. अब आज की सिचुएशन थोड़ी डिफरेंट हो गई है. नाउ दिस गवर्नमेंट has turned the situation around 180 degrees for a very positive situation. आज की सीन क्या हो रही कि international investors are coming to this country because it's a country worth investing in. However, the question that comes up is we do not have long-term finance in this country. We do not have a debt market. डेट मार्केट इसलिए नहीं है कि आप अगर एक घर हाइपोथिकेट करोगे उसमें स्टैंप ड्यूटी दोगे स्टेट गवर्नमेंट को स्टैंप ड्यूटी चाहिए, आप एक प्रॉपर्टी रजिस्टर कराओगे उसके अलग चार्जेस लगते हैं, तो आप डेट इंस्ट्रूमेंट ले ही नहीं सकते। जैसे इक्विटी को ट्रेड करते हैं, आप डेट को ट्रेड नहीं कर पा रहे, सो देयर इज नो डेट मार्केट। दैट मीन्स यू हैव ओनली गॉट शॉर्ट टर्म फाइनेंस, एंड दैट्स वेयर आई एम गोइंग टू लुक फॉरवर्ड टू हियरिंग फ्रॉम डॉक्टर साहब कि हाउ इज ही गोइंग टू फाइनेंस ए पावर प्रोजेक्ट विच हैज अ लाइफ ऑफ 25, 30, 40, 50 years. He's a short-term lender, not a long-term lender. So that's one thing that needs to be fixed. The second thing that needs to be fixed is that the regulator of power is not a power chap. He's an IAS guy or a sales tax commissioner or in some case a marriage judge who has become a regulator. Why he's become a regulator, God knows. उसको पता ही नहीं कि power क्या है. अच्छा, sorry for taking more time than I should. आप जज के सामने खड़े हो जाओ और उसको समझाओ इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का ये प्रॉब्लम है, उसको he'll say yes, I understand what you're saying, but he doesn't understand what you're saying. So it's not their fault. They don't have exposure. So we need government to come up with a strategy where everybody sitting in this room, everybody sitting should understand कि मैं इलेक्ट्रिसिटी कंज्यूमर की बजाय मैं इलेक्ट्रिसिटी जनरेटर भी बन सकता हूँ. I can also make money from my meter. And that's another story which I'd be happy to elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. You know, you have put things in really in context. The way we have seen, many of the infrastructure projects start bleeding and how they started bleeding the institutions as well. Charan Singh ji, if I can come to you, Harry has given us a great deep dive about the situation, and we have seen how banks faltered. And rightly he said that most of Indian banks are commercial banks, and from housing loan to infrastructure finance, we expect everything to come from the banks. So how do you see this situation, improving? How's you playing a part in your bank to change this attitude? Sir, mic is yours.
So first of all, I must mention when the State Electricity Board problems came up and the issue of cleaning the balance sheet of state electricity boards emerged, I used to work in the Reserve Bank. They came out with a very bright idea that all our bad debt should be put onto the balance sheet of the commercial banks, and we'll get a clean balance sheet, and now we'll get money from the World Bank to start again. I used to be sitting on that chair which would say that this is possible or not possible. So I know the pains that the power sector went through. I also know the joys of the state electricity boards when this proposal was made, and I also know the difficulty of the banker in accepting that proposal. Much has been written on that, and this state electricity boards debt going on to the banks, and then the banks become a bad balance sheet. As you mentioned in your introduction, there is a twin deficit problem. The corporate sector has a balance sheet which is in, corporate sector is in deficit, and the banks would get into deficit. Nothing will move, nothing will help. Now the issue that you have mentioned is very, very complex. One of the things that happens in the infrastructure is every infrastructure is different. Roads are different, power is different, ports are different, dams are different, every infrastructure project is different. So it's not as easy as a car loan that we know this is a car, there's a truck, here's a commercial viability evaluation, and the loan can be given. Firstly, each one is different. Secondly, there's opaqueness. Even if you're going private, even if you're going PPP, there is opaqueness in all the infrastructure projects. The third issue is the duration. The infrastructure projects which are in real terms infrastructure, they take about 50 years of gestation period. There's investment involved. It's basically sinking of money. The best way to think about is pick up any dam. In a dam, you're just sinking money. And it's only by 50th year or 75th year that the return starts coming. Now, when we ask the banks, commercial banks, to fund projects like this, obviously there's a mismatch to which he has just referred. You're raising resources on short-term basis and you're lending resources on long-term basis. Complete mismatch takes place. But then in the country, you also have projects which are pension funds, provident funds are there, insurance funds are there, which are long term. Therefore, in the Reserve Bank of India, at one point of time, we had loans which were for 50 years duration. We had also loans at one point, not now, which were perpetuities, which meant more than 100 years, or they need not ever be returned. Now the issue is, can commercial banks go in for such projects? So in our country, when we started the development, and he's right, he speaks about 1991 when the reform started. In our own country, we had the Industrial Development Bank of India, long term. We had ICICI, again long term. And then when the 1991 reform started taking place, everybody wanted to become a universal bank, which implies infrastructure emphasis was given away, and then commercial viability became important. Now the issue is, where are we right now? Right now, infrastructure projects tend to become NPAs. And because they become NPAs, they tend to become NPAs very fast for two reasons. First reason is, universal banks, they can easily fund a car, a truck, a bus, an aircraft, airline. But to fund an infrastructure project, look at the commercial viability, look at the discount rates, look at the cash flow, is not easy. And I gave you the reasons why they're not easy. Each one is unique, so I cannot train a person to do all of them together. So that is the reason the commercial banks approached the government and said, because you are emphasizing a lot on infrastructure, and it should be, because infrastructure is a much higher multiplier than a normal expenditure. Because you are emphasizing infrastructure, we need a dedicated bank on infrastructure. That was the logic that was being given. And the origin of that logic was that the NPAs that were happening mostly in the infrastructure project. Now, I must flag an issue. He just referred it in the passing. I must flag an issue. Infrastructure development has been a challenge for our country for many years. In the Reserve Bank, we had been thinking, talking, and learning from America, where infrastructure developed as a debt market. In our country, right from the Patil Committee report, we have been thinking about developing the debt market. Debt markets have not been developing. Private placements have always taken place. Debt markets are totally opaque. And in this world, democratic country like ours, unlike China, and also very transparent accounting systems, unlike China, that we Indians have, it's very difficult to go ahead with the private placement for debt markets. Debt markets have not developed. Then the issue is, and again mentioned in the passing, most of the countries which we are proud to look at their infrastructure, be it America, Euro countries, and England, the major infrastructure there has been developed by the slaves and financing by the countries like ours, which were colonized. Tell me one country where infrastructure development like the one we are attempting has been attempted anywhere, which is democratic like India, and which has different and very transparent accounting practices. State and center both have a role to play. There's not a single one. So we are pioneering a path for the world as to how to develop infrastructure. What is the way ahead? If you give me time, in my second round, I'll come up with suggestions. What is the way ahead? One is the infrastructure bank, which we are now insisting upon, and government is kind and thinking about it. And there are other ways of doing it. Bond market, debt market is not possible. In America it happened. Nowhere has it been replicated elsewhere. The railways of America happened with the debt, but they had, as I told you, supplemented with the slaves as well as financing from other places. We need to now experiment with another method, which I'll share.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Dr. Saab, bond market is a very complicated thing that requires more of government's handholding as well. And government tried it and failed it, if I'm not wrong. Amit, if I can come to you, the debt markets problems, if we distill down to them, that goes down to the wrong structuring of projects as well, and over dependence on government's helps and government's assistance in getting the regulatory okays to get the projects go. And we saw many of the projects didn't even fly in the past. One of the corporates was once telling me that before even hiring finance experts or engineers, I tend to look at who's the good corporate lawyer, and I'm sure I'll hit the regulators or I'll hit the courts. So tell me, whether things have started changing now when government is now talking about de-risking many of the projects. We have already seen some years of hybrid annuity in roads. Even in the renewable sector, government is supporting many of the things. Do you think there is some change, or situation is getting silently back towards the bad old days?
Thank you. I think let's examine the issue stepping back a bit. Infrastructure, fundamentally in a democratic setup, is the responsibility of the state. It's the government which is supposed to make available water, electricity, roads, airports and other facilities. It's because the governments don't have enough funds. And that is why it is only in post-91 era, 96, 97 onwards, that we started seeing PPPs, private sector participation. Now, you want private sector to come in, good idea. But you want private sector to start absorbing the policy issues and the subsidy burden, which is not a part of the plan for private sector. How does it work? You want to create an asset in an airport which is 60 years life, a power plant which is 30 years life, but the debt you want to give is not more than 10 to 12 years. What does it do to the consumer? 75% to 80% of the capital has to be repaid with interest within the first 6 to 8 years of operation, because 4 years odd is construction phase. So rather than consider this, if you were taking a 100 rupee loan and you were repaying it in 10 years, the capital repayment each year is 10%, 10 rupees. If you were to spread it over 25, the capital will be 4. Will that reduce the burden of the consumer? I think it would. But in spite of the fact that we moved out of public financing to private sector coming in, we have not changed that. Has it not been done anywhere in the world? Let's consider. How is it that Canadian pension funds are able to come and take the country risk of India and invest in roads and in renewable energy projects, while our insurance and pension funds don't? Who controls them? Where is the regulation of that? So the problem is that we are still working with infrastructure in a siloized manner. Do we have a plan where we're looking at the entirety of the value chain of transport in one shot, so that we can look at an agricultural product from the farm to wherever it has to be taken after storage, whether cold storage or otherwise on the way, whether it's an export house or you're trying to process and produce something and then to distribute? If it's energy, whether you're looking at petroleum, natural gas allocations, the pricing, coal pricing, renewable sector, and then looking at it, that's availability, its transport, location to the power project, and to transportation to the consumer. Somewhere in this whole battle, in the complexity we have created around a very straightforward issue, is the fact that the common man has been lost in the debate. And all the efforts that have been made are trying to address at the edges some of the problems. Look at the core problem. Is it difficult to understand that if you want to create an asset of 60 years, you want to make available long-term finance? Why is it that you only have 10-year finance? Is pension insurance fund not available in India? Is the regulatory regime and the government not able to, and the courts not able to sit together and say, and the amendment has come, by the way, after Kelkar committee report, saying that you will have fast-track dispute resolution, specific relief act has been amended. Special courts must be established everywhere. No court should interfere or grant injunction. Project must go on. You and I have a dispute on a bid or construction or operations, dispute to be resolved in a fast manner, but that doesn't stop the availability of the infrastructure, which is a core input to the economy. It's for the citizens' comfort. Yet the thinking at the operational level is of the level that even now, in April of 2023, same as the Chinnappa Reddy observation, another judgment, one of the celebrated judges of the Supreme Court, even before this matter of Enron and Dabur, he wrote in a Pune case where expansion of a road was to be done. A particular private person whose land was to be acquired filed the case, got an injunction. Injunction continued for 25 years. Eventually, injunction was listed, the road was constructed. I don't know how many times the cost went up. In those 25 years, we don't know what is the loss to productivity to the economy. Who factors these? So there is a need for a rethinking, which incidentally the government has done. In the Kelkar committee report, which has been accepted, there were some 73 recommendations. One recommendation that's been implemented, the only one, was to provide for fast-track courts. But after enactment of the law, the special courts appointed by different states are in a patchy situation. Most people still don't know that that exists. They are not using that mechanism. So, first and foremost, we need to address the infrastructure problem as a one-shot problem with a focus on the citizen. And the focus on the citizen will come when it's debt financing, you look at long-term debt, because you reduce the burden on the consumer, make it viable. Agar aapki return of the debt is down to 2 rupees, 100 rupees example, or 25 years is 4 rupees principal. You do it in 10 years, you do 10 rupees a year. Where will the price come from? From you and me, from the consumer. Second, if you're looking at the resolution of the issue, then why would you not de-risk it completely? We have still not, though we have talked since 1990s, to build capacity in the government. Our major failure is in contract management. The approach largely, and this is not one government or the other, since then, the pipeline of stuck projects is basically because once a PPP is entered into, the approach of the governmental authority, monkeys off my back. Private sector came and bid for it, their problem, God bless them. World over, it is a recognized fact that when you have complex long-term contracts, these are called incomplete contracts. You can never enter into a contract that can provide for all scenarios. Unforeseeable is the only foreseeable reality. In 30 years or 60 years, coal problem will come, Indonesia will override the laws, your PPAs will go topsy-turvy, Coal India will stop throughput or will have problems, gas will get stranded, all of these things will come which you never planned for. Financial crisis will come, the cost of debt will go up. You have to be nimble-footed in resolving the problem. We get stuck for 10 and 15 years. Therefore, unless we keep, and by the way, the Constitution of India provides for that. Article 39 in the Directive Principles of State Policy specifically says all public resources must be utilized for the maximum welfare of the citizen, must not be monopolized for private profit. Implement it. So there is a need now for a national level chintan. All agencies, whether legislature, executive, judiciary, private and public sector, we need to be unified in our approach, because at the end of the day, let's face it, it's a citizen's commodity. Whether you're getting coal, you're getting mining resources, you're getting access to airwaves, all of these are public assets. The government doesn't own it. Government is a trustee of the citizen. Their role is to maximize the benefit to the citizen and reduce the profit and the cost and keep it reasonable. Delhi example, you privatized electricity in 2002. Losses in East Delhi used to be 75%. In average was 55%. Today the DISCOMs are operating as a joint venture at 6 to 7% losses. 1% loss across Delhi is 100 crores of rupees saved. Also, that's that much more electrons coming legitimately to supply. Yet, the regulatory asset which is lying in courts is upwards of 50,000 crores. So how do you match it up? Therefore, there is a need for a rethinking in resolving these problems. These are not problems that you can afford to play on, as the Western debt comes at 1-2%. Our debt comes at 12 and 14%. How are you going to fund it? Who's going to pay for it? So we are actually, by delaying and deferring, not in my tenure but somebody else's, we are compounding our problem multifold. That need of urgency which we have seen in IBC has to come in regulatory measures. So some positive steps taken, like the LPS rules came. What is the net result? Earlier NTPC used to have maybe 1 or 2% of the debt, they still have only 1 or 2%. So from 1.5 lakh crores outstanding, it is 75,000 crores right now. I checked right now. But it's still 75,000 crores. The current cumulative dues owed to generators by the distribution companies. Why is that? Because the state governments don't give the subsidy. They announce that give free power. Why is that? So the whole chain has to be dealt with.
So the issue needs to be dealt more with the
It is
political economy perspective, not
Absolutely.
only economic perspective.
It can't be done piecemeal. It's not a project level issue.
Yeah. Mr. Singh, when you look at many of these projects now especially, so how do you, perceive, because banks are also risking themselves in, financing many of these projects. So what is your mindset? How do you tell your people that how to evaluate projects? So is there any new protocol which you have developed or new thought process you have developed to assess many of these projects?
The fact is that the issues that he has flagged are genuine, and these are not static. They're very, very dynamic issues that are coming up. The sectors which are being identified, the proposals which are coming. One of the most important thing that I must mention here, in India, actually in most parts of the world, but especially in India, I have the statistics, about 90% of the projects are financed by the government. As far as our country is concerned, 75% by the central and state governments and 15% by the urban local bodies when it comes to infrastructure. It is only 5% that's coming from the private sector. Now, once it's the government which is playing a key role, the bankers, especially the public sector banks, they feel very safe because there's a standard guarantee which comes with the government standing by the project. So that makes it easy. Most of the projects that we have been watching in our own country are coming from the government, and PPP are not that many, but government funding helps us in a very big way in providing a guarantee. But the thought that I have, apart from being on the bank, the overall thought that I have is, how do we, in a democratic system with a very transparent accountancy, very transparent regulation, very transparent balance sheets that we maintain, unlike some countries which are now competing with us in infrastructure, I think the projects have to be broken in bits and pieces. The debt market has to get established. This was not there when the Patil Committee report was submitted about 30 years ago. The point I am making is we have to involve the local people. Now, the example that I would like to give is, say we are developing a road from Bangalore to Chennai. Now, who all are going to benefit from that road? The commerce in that corridor is going to increase tremendously. Or call it Delhi-Bombay corridor. In that whole corridor, people are going to benefit. The debt market, if it places the debt instrument in a way saying that local people are going to benefit and therefore they have to fund this project, this is a 25-year period project. You will find if marketing is done properly, projects are broken into bits and pieces. For example, Delhi-Bombay corridor is broken into, say, Delhi, Baroda, Bombay, or still more chunks. Local people, local urban local bodies, local state governments, they start playing a role in the debt market. Only then the debt market, because debt market also needs 2-3 things. It needs instruments, it needs a product, what are they actually going to fund, and it needs money. Money has to come from somewhere. So in our country, as happened in other countries, initial infrastructure is done by the government. That support will have to come from the government. Once the government provides that infrastructure, then there is a trigger. Then the private sector is confident, starts playing a role and taking it forward. So the crowding out has to take place in a very big way. Only then we will be able to do it. Now, in some cases, World Bank was providing 75-year loans, and the IFC, the wing of the World Bank, generally provides loans for 75 years and above. If the projects are viable and if the projects have established credibility, in some cases that gets lost. You have a toll bridge or a toll road. And once that's constructed at a heavy cost, suddenly people don't want to pay that toll. Then the credibility gets very badly impacted. So I think local administration, local politicians will also have to play a role in establishing credibility that if it's a 75-year project, money has come from the World Bank or IFC at rates which he mentioned 1 or 2%, that's a genuine rate. Unlike the local market, which is only able to fund at 12%, that has a lot to do with inflation, but that carries an exchange rate risk, which is not there in the local funding, so it doesn't make too much of difference, but certainly it comes cheaper. Then the credibility part has to be taken care of by the local administration. So it's a long exercise. It's a difficult exercise, but all the stakeholders will have to play a role in it.
Harry, I want to bring you in this conversation. Amit has given us a real reality check, and he is giving us the banker's perspective. Tell us, many of your friends at IPPAI, they have burned their fingers, right? Their dues are not being delivered by discoms and many of their buyers. So, what will it take to us, to bring them back to invest in many of the infrastructure projects? Because many of the IPPI clients might not want to get in the infrastructure sector. So what more needs to be done to bring them back?
See, the biggest challenge which I want to share with you is that one government in one state invites private sector to come and invest in infrastructure. I'm not talking about the central government. The central government is doing a damn good job. I'm talking about the state for a minute. Then the next government comes in and they reverse those policies. So there is no concept of sanctity of contract, rule of law. And I'll give you a quick example on that. We had a deep dive into the sanctity of contract and rule of law, जिसमें ये पता चला कि भाई एक contract is signed and that is sanctity. So the judge who came to the conference said 100% we will follow the contract. The next person was a central regulator. Central regulator says, you know what, हाँ वो ठीक है, but अगर उसमें कुछ गड़बड़ है, कुछ malpractice है, तो we can open the contract. तो sanctity से हम चले गए optional. Then the third guy comes and says, you know what, if there is malified in public interest, we can open anything. अगर एग्जीक्यूटिव कोर्ट के सामने खड़े होकर बोले कि सर पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट में ये कॉन्ट्रैक्ट खोलना है तो खुल जाएगा. जज नॉट गोइंग टू से डोंट डू इट. देन व्हाट हैपेंस? Somebody stands up from the National Law School in Bangalore and says, he's a Harvard guy, he says, and this is very important for everyone, I have as much right to renege on my contract as I have to enforce it, as long as I make a profit. तो मैंने कहा यार रघुकुल रीत सदा चली आई, प्राण जाए पर बचन ना जाए, ये कौन सा कल्चरली कॉन्सेप्ट अलग है. तो उसने कहा ये इंग्लिश जूरिस्प्रूडेंस का फंडामेंटल है कि मुझे प्रॉफिट बनाना है. अब उसमें ओवर द लास्ट 30 years दैट वी बीन रनिंग आईपीपीआई हमें ये पता चला है कि प्राइवेट सेक्टर तो चोर है, गवर्नमेंट का कोई आदमी हो तो वो ठीक है. दिस इज द पब्लिक परसेप्शन. सो व्हेन यू आर आस्किंग प्राइवेट सेक्टर टू इन्वेस्ट एंड यू आर सेइंग वो चोर है, देन यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड द काइंड ऑफ thought process. But I want to say something very positive about this government. America में you got funding from the private banks and you got built your infrastructure European banks के through. And very rightly Dr. Saab said that slaves were used in Europe and the colonial powers to build their infrastructure. But something fantastic has been done after the Enron fiasco. This government has encouraged private sector companies to be able to borrow internationally. This is a fantastic thing. People have not understood the meaning and the importance of this. अगर एक प्राइवेट सेक्टर वाला वहां से $100 million, $500 million लाके एक ब्रिज बना रहा है, या एक रोड बना रहा है, या एक पोर्ट बना रहा है, या एयरपोर्ट बना रहा है, वो वाला थोड़ी यूज करेगा. भाई हम ही तो यूज करेंगे, तो बेनिफिट तो हमारा हुआ ना. एंड दैट हैज गॉट नथिंग टू विद गवर्नमेंट. बट टुडे द पॉलिटिकल नैरेटिव इज प्राइवेट वाले ये हैं, प्राइवेट वाले वो हैं. इट्स ऑल राइट. आई एम डिफेंडिंग प्राइवेट वालाज आल्सो running IPPI. But this is something which
maybe
we need to think about it.
Maybe some years will take to make a positive story about private sector. Once we start having several of the private stories which are building the nation.
We've got success stories already, boss. Why so many years? मुझे तो आज चाहिए.
So slowly the time will come, sir. So, but my time is getting over.
I can see
so I can see the red signal there. So I'm really thankful to all three of you. You have given us really good insights. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking your time out. Thank you.